I'm looking for your opinion regarding purchasing a home. First, a little background about myself. I'm finishing a competitive internal medicine subspecialty fellowship this year. I will be moving to an expensive suburb of a metropolitan city in the northeast part of the U.S. I have worked for 1 year as a hospitalist between residency and fellowship. My wife is currently a part-time employee due to us having two very young children at home, and she will be going back to being a full-time employee within a calendar year. She will be making about $100,000 per year when she goes back to being full-time. I will be making in the mid $300,000 range. We have currently our investments, which are about $350,000. I have zero student debt, and we have two 529 plans with $4,000 in each. The homes we are looking at range around $800,000 to $900,000 range. I wanted to get your opinion regarding about those pricing of the homes will make me house poor by buying too much house. Thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Okay, basically the question is, should I buy a home? How much home should I buy? Sounds like they're going to an expensive place in the Northeast, expecting an income of about $450,000 and no student loans. Well, I'm a big fan of owning your home. I think once you are in a stable professional and a stable personal situation, you ought to buy a home. I think it's an important aspect of building wealth. Now, that doesn't mean you can't build wealth if you're a lifelong renter. And in fact, there's a few areas in this country where that's not a crazy thing to do. Especially since buying costs so much more than renting, in some places like the Bay Area. But in general, I think it's good for doctors to be able to buy their homes. If doctors can't buy a home, who can buy a home, right? That said, that doesn't mean that everybody ought to buy a home all the time. There are times in your life when it's smarter to rent. For example, if you're only going to be someplace for a year or two, if you're in the military and you're moving every 3 years, I think buying a home's dumb. Even if you hold it longer than the 2 or 3 or 4 years you'll be there, you're going to be a long-distance landlord, which I assure you is no fun. And so I think, in those situations where you're not going to be in a house for longer than 5 years or so, it's usually a mistake to buy. Obviously, sometimes the market goes up quickly. You can't know that in advance, but maybe a third of the time, if you hold on to a house for 3 years, you still make money. But that means 2/3 of the time you're not making money. So in this case, buy the house if you guys both like your jobs and your jobs like you and your family's stable. The marriage is good. You're not expecting twins next week and you're not going to have enough bedrooms for them, that sort of a thing. Then go ahead and buy the house. My general rule is to keep your mortgage under 2 times your gross income. And so if you're making $450,000 a year, that would suggest a mortgage no larger than $900,000. So if you buy $1 million house, you put $100,000 down, your mortgage is $900,000, you stay within that rule. Now, in some really expensive areas, maybe your DC and your Boston and your Manhattan and your Bay Area, sometimes you might have to stretch that rule a little bit. You might have to stretch this 2x gross income mortgage rule. But when I'm talking about stretching, I'm talking about 3x, maybe 4x, not 10x. That's just crazy. You're going to be totally house poor doing that. Even going to 3 to 4x, you got to realize that there are some significant financial sacrifices you are going to make buying a house that expensive. You're not going to accumulate wealth as quickly. You may have trouble maxing out your retirement accounts. You may not be able to travel as much. You might need to drive a dumpier car, etc. There are consequences to doing that, and often that means a longer career and working longer. But if you're fine with that, it's not crazy if you're in San Francisco to get a 3x mortgage, right? In fact, you're probably going to have to be, given the cost of housing related to the salaries of doctors there. If you want your questions answered by the White Coat Investor, record your question at whitecoatinvestor.com/YQA or click the link in the description.
My dad, your host, Dr. Dolly, is a practicing emergency physician, blogger, author, and podcaster. He is not a licensed accountant, attorney, or financial advisor, so this podcast is for your entertainment and information only and should not be considered official, personalized financial advice.